So today's topic is written a little bit like clickbait. Hopefully that was a good draw to get you in. And today's title is Data is a Four-Letter Word, which is an intro to the 4 C's of data for executives. So I have been doing several talks this year on the concept of the 4 C's. If you've seen them before, you'll start to see some of the thematic structure around the 4 C's flow through. But what we really wanted to do was focus in on the combination of excitement and frustration that exists in large enterprises around actualizing wins in the business with data, specifically around this move towards the cookieless world. You know, people are again swearing a lot when it comes to data, thinking about a world where cookies don't work. Data is a 4-letter word, right? So before we start to get into some of the specifics on the topic, quick intros. My name is Jim Cain. I'm the founder and CEO of Napkyn Analytics. We will turn 13, I think, next spring. And for that entire period of time, we have been focused exclusively on providing the value of digital analytics to the mid to large enterprise. And over the last 5 or 6 years, really emphasizing the power of data through the Google marketing platform. So Google Analytics, Analytics 360, Google Tag Manager, Google Cloud. The companies that we work with expect us to partner with them to help them realize the value of digital data, both in terms of collecting it and storing it, but also using it for reporting, using it for insights, and obviously my favorite area, using it for strategy. So informing things that we're going to do with data and not just reporting on things that we've already done. That's where I like to have my fun. So, that's Napkyn, that's me. And to go back a slide, that's what I looked like 7 years ago without any gray hair. You can see a discrepancy between my video and that picture. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda for today. So what I thought I would do is really spend a minute wrapping our heads around this concept of the cookieless world, or the reason people are treating data as a 4-letter word right now. What is the particular project that most businesses either should be focusing on right now or will be having to focus on in the middle of the year next year? Again, in terms of planning for the cookieless world. Once we've talked a little bit about that particular type of work that will need to be done again by most businesses, let's talk about the problem in terms of being able to move forward with an initiative to solve or plan for cookieless world. Why are most businesses treating this as kind of a game of, pin the tail on the donkey, only with much more expensive software? What's the root cause? Why does this problem in terms of actualizing on data initiatives exist inside businesses? And therefore, kind of what is the solution? And hopefully also include an application of that solution to the data as a 4-letter word cookieless world issue. So let's just take a quick step back. Let's talk about the cookieless world. Let's talk about cookie extinction, right? We could go all the way back to the late 90s, I think was the first lawsuit. I think it was the United States against Coremetrics around cookies. But the concept of the cookie, whether it's first or third party, has been an issue since digital analytics moved from log files to the browser. But we've really seen over the last 6 or 7 years some major changes in terms of cookies moving from being controversial to cookies kind of being dead, right? And this began back in 2016 when the EU adopted GDPR, which is a wide-reaching and quite assertive in terms of penalties program around individual data privacy in Europe. It certainly put the fear in everyone in ad tech and martech. We at Napkyn spent an appreciable amount of money on lawyers to make sure that we were compliant. And by the way, we were. But it really shook up the worlds of ad tech in particular, martech a little, in terms of what are we capturing? Should we be capturing it? Are we allowing the individual to kind of control their own destiny in regards to their data? And shortly after GDPR came out, Apple started to kind of be one of the marketplace leaders in terms of creating privacy-focused or individual privacy-focused updates to their browsers. A lot of those updates were around ITP, or intelligent tracking prevention. And Apple is way out there at the lead in terms of limiting what cookies can do. I have some theories as to why that is. Chat for another time. Maybe if the world is less weird, we can talk about it in a bar or at a conference. But the big thing is that Apple is definitely at the vanguard of limiting what kinds of data can be captured by advertisers. Now, Google's followed relatively closely behind, and to the extent where in January of last year, Google said, you know what, third-party cookies are going to be completely gone by 2022. Now, they've obviously updated that and said, add a year and change onto that. It'll be more like 2023. But you can see this progression, this kind of tightening, especially at the browser level, of what kind of data will be captured and made available. And realistically, regardless of how this ultimately has the rubber hit the road in terms of the technology, we're going to live in a world where cookies are no longer really usable by marketers and analysts to look at the performance of digital and kind of go on offense in terms of creating advanced marketing campaigns. So full step, no cookies, right? Like that's really where we're going. It is a little terrifying, especially a little bit as an analyst, again, very much so as an advertiser. And if we kind of look at this reverse funnel in terms of data availability, as more and more cookies are deprecated, first party cookies mostly only last for 24 hours now, as opposed to, a year and change. We've lost a tremendous amount of data regarding kind of customer journey, attribution, things that are pan session or time impacted. All that data is being impaired. Third party cookies are disappearing. We don't get that network level data at all. That's going to impact our reporting. When we're collecting less and we're reporting less, we therefore have less data to turn back around and do marketing with, right? You can't create an audience without data. You can't understand attribution without data over time, right? You can't personalize to users when you can't keep anything about who your users are. This move towards cookieless is extremely impactful. Now, it doesn't mean it's the end of times. We were collecting all kinds of great data before the cookie. We'll collect all kinds of great data after. But ultimately, every business needs to sit back and go, what are we trying to accomplish? What does data mean to us? And how do we position ourselves as a business to not lose out on this, real, I hate the phrase paradigm shift, but it is a paradigm shift in terms of how people are capturing and using data. How do we prepare for it, right? And if we think about a successful data project to approach the cookieless world, the first thing I always think about is who should be in charge of this project kind of internally. And certain types of projects, and we're going to spend more time on this in a minute, but certain types of projects make more sense to be owned by different parts of the org. I really think that something as profound as completely changing the way that data is being captured and used for marketing and reporting, at least in regards to digital, needs to be a C-suite initiative. This can't be owned by the marketers. This can't directly be owned by IT. This needs to be sponsored and supported by, people that sit in the boardroom, right? They have the most explicit value proposition in terms of preparing for third-party cookie extinction and first-party cookie kind of deprecation. And that explicit value proposition to them is to get ahead of the market. You need to start thinking about this new world of data. Certain things that you used to be able to do easily will either be much harder to do or impossible to do. Data needs to stop being, in effect, something that is thrown off of campaigns and start being considered as an asset where it's being created on purpose so it can be used and leveraged later. It is something of value, right? Certain types of initiatives and data, as I mentioned before, that used to be easy, and retargeting is an obvious example. You're just not going to be able to do those things anymore, or probably not, right? Like, we're still not sure where Google's going to land in regards to Flock, but retargeting is going to be difficult or harder. But with a new approach to data, creating it, capturing it, using it, profiting off of it, significant new opportunities that aren't even possible now can be unlocked by businesses that get ahead of the curve. To me, that sounds like an initiative that should come out of a CXO, right? That's again, another consulting phrase I don't like, but transformation. This is a transformative initiative. It should come from the C-suite. Now, just because it comes from the C-suite doesn't necessarily mean that it's not adding like real value to all the other parts of the organization. If we think about a really successful cookieless world planning initiative, the IT organization actually gets a ton of win here, right? Historically, ad tech and martech initiatives tend to outpace the delivery cycles of an IT organization. Marketing buys something, they want it set up next week. IT's got their capacity plan for the next 6 months. Friction, right? And that often leads to half-assed, what we would kind of call, I don't know, again, not enterprise level executed work. And IT's not happy with it. It's liable to break. We would call it hot fix. There, I remember the phrase. And all that hot fix work just really equals creating problems in the future, right? A first party data initiative or a cookieless world initiative that IT participates in that meets their requirements means they're actually going to be able to go back in and future-proof their existing data infrastructure. Data can now be created properly against a specification that's been documented. Data can be passed through into a business in a way that can be governed, that won't break. Systems can be created that allow marketing to operate on their kind of cadence while allowing IT to meet their demand for rigor and quality, right? So there's a huge win for IT in moving towards planning for a cookieless world. Now, their effort requirement is going to be medium to high. There's a lot of work in there for them. But just because the C-suite owns it doesn't mean IT doesn't win, right? Same thing applies to the data organization inside a business, and it could be called the marketing analytics org. It could be called, the database organization, the BI team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But most medium to large enterprises have a team somewhere that owns data on purpose. It tends to not be digital data, ironically, but they will get significant win out of a project to prepare for a cookieless world, right? The successful initiative for cookieless world is actually kind of data and tool and stack agnostic. The goal is to create high quality usable data, bring it into the business where it can be owned and used. Data teams love that kind of stuff, especially because they tend to be building schema and structure around everything else, from call center to logistics to fulfillment to offline marketing, and digital is often somewhere else, right? It's going to help them bring all those things together and help almost build a data layer for the business. They get a significant win out of this kind of initiative. They also need to step up to the plate with some effort and some requirements, but they get wins here too. And obviously, this is good ham abounds for the entire business user part of the organization, right? So these are the people that do marketing, the people in charge of email, the people who are doing reporting and analysis on digital performance. Instead of going to a world where all the lights go off with no cookies, by preparing in advance for those things to happen, reporting can stay going, marketing campaigns can continue to run, and it's also a great opportunity for the business users to look at some of the deficiencies in their part of the organization right now and remediate them, right? So we're having issues with training. Well, let's make training one of the requirements for our cookieless world programs, right? There's certain areas of the data we're creating that we don't trust because accuracy. Let's sort those things out now, right? So as you can see, a successful data project, even though the most explicit value proposition is to the executive team or the C-suite, there are very strong implicit kind of secondary wins or value propositions that reflect other key parts of the organization, all of whom are going to have to contribute effort, right? So first party data initiative, complicated, the ability to generate significant win, pretty straightforward, as long as everybody pulls together. And that's really where you think about this kind of 4 C's methodology that I'll spend time on in a second in practice, right? Ideally, a representative needs to be nominated to execute a data project of this size, because the thing that you need to realize is very few businesses have a chief data officer or an organization that owns data throughout the business who can do things like that on their own. It needs to be multiple parts of the organization kind of pulling or rowing together, right? So one part of the org needs to nominate a representative. In this instance, it should be from the C-suite. They have the most explicit value proposition. They own this initiative, but in owning it, they need to acknowledge that the other parts of the business that they're partnering with for execution are also getting wins. They should therefore be sources of requirements. It's a lot easier to put in work if you know that you're going to get something at the end of the day, right? In executing this program, each department that is contributing needs to be considered a group of stakeholders. And when it's done, everybody needs to sit back and go, we just did a major piece of data work together. Did everybody get what they were promised? What were the places that went bang when we were working? How can we make sure this doesn't happen again? How is our next data initiative or our first up versioning or iteration of our cookieless world data initiative? How do we make those things bigger, better, faster, stronger, right? Those steps with the value proposition I discussed earlier and a whole bunch more detail that I could share in another webinar sometime, Equal Business is really starting to take major strides forward about winning with data. Now, here's the problem with an initiative that is this kind of sophisticated and requires so many different departments working together. Before I get into the problem, this is one of my kids. I used to make demotivational posters with pictures of my kids when they were a lot younger. Maybe you will get a kick out of them. I still do. But what's the problem with these kinds of initiatives? Well, Mr. Davenport, who has written some of the best books on data the last 5 or 6 years, has a great quote. Every company has big data in its future. Every company will eventually be in the data business. And even if you think about small businesses now, people who are just running Shopify stores, people analyzing the POS data from their corner store. Every data ultimately really is a data business at heart, whether they realize it or not. However, 74% of people that are asked about the effectiveness of data realize that they have more data than they've ever had before, but they're still struggling to use it to generate useful business insights. I think this quote is kind of neat because it was reading things like this that made me start Napkyn in the first place. So it goes to show you that in 15 years, we've really never been able to get ahead of the desire for businesses to leverage data, but do it effectively, right? So here's the third quote. This is kind of the sad one to me. And working in data, it's also not wildly surprising, but through the end of next year, only 20% of analytic insights will deliver business outcomes. So any time an organization invests time and money and capacity and people's big brains into trying to win with data, 1 in 5 times it will add value. That's pretty swear word disheartening as someone who is into data, who is an analyst, to think 80% of the time your work fails. And if you've ever been to an analytics conference and you're sitting in the lobby bar at the end of the day, this is the big topic that comes up, right? Very frustrating when the business is saying, we are a data business, and then the business is saying, we have more data than we know what to do with. And then the business is saying, most of the time when we try and do something with data, it sucks and doesn't add any value. That's a huge problem, right? It could be the biggest challenge in business right now, full stop, providing we buy into Mr. Davenport's statement that every business is a data business. So one more quote from me, and this is another, a bit of a cheeseball consulting phrase, but I really like it actually, and it's the concept of data democratization. And what does this mean, right? So everybody has access to data. There's no gatekeepers. There's no bottlenecks. Insofar as I want to use data to drive better decisions, right? And if you think of large enterprises, and some of them are still like this, especially ones that use Adobe Analytics, the tools are so complicated to use that you need to write down your question, you need to email it to the analytics kind of center of excellence. They will at some point get back to you with an answer. If you ever have another question, you have to go to them. That's not very democratic, right? It does not allow people to go out and just win with data and be their own analyst and kind of compete with numbers, right? So the goal of data democratization is to allow anybody in the org to use data at any time to make decisions. There's no barriers. Data is easy to use. Training on how to use and think about data is kind of ubiquitous in the org. That creates a data-driven business. That's definitely something that we endorse wholeheartedly at Napkyn, and it's definitely, in our opinion, the first step towards getting past this, kind of 1 in 5 insights wins issue. However, it doesn't happen a lot. So, if we all agree that data is really important, we all agree that we got tons of data and we can't keep up with it. We all agree that, most of the times the data initiative or insight doesn't work. And we all agree that we would like to be more democratic with data. Why the heck is no one satisfied with where they are if we're all violently agreeing so much, right? Now, what's the root cause of, the previous 4 quotes? Why is there so much data that people are frustrated with and want to win with? Well, in my opinion, the disconnect is because, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a single individual team inside the business which is in charge of helping the business win with data. So in a data-driven organization or data democracy, everybody needs to be involved. But in any kind of process, someone has to be in charge, right? And I actually think it points towards that there is no silo in the org chart that is designed to make everybody else win with data. Because there's nothing democratic about that. That's just a much more sophisticated 2022 edition of that center of excellence concept, right? So in thinking about how everyone can win with data, everyone needs to participate. It's one of the biggest problems with digital transformation, right? But in the absence of that kind of deliberate structure, with one team owning data, everyone is in charge of winning with data, but no one owns it. And that's where you start to see some of these significant conflicts, because when you look at the key groups in the business that are involved in data, and I picked 4 key ones, in my opinion, that are the most critical for digital analytics, which is IT, the data teams, the business users, and the executive team. They live in relatively active conflict in a way that I think is probably good for the business, but leads to conflict. So, having been a consultant for, almost 15 years, almost exclusively in digital, where my primary stakeholders are the executive team and marketing, but we do a lot of work with IT and data teams. We see this conflict all the time. I've actually delivered talks over the years. I did one with Observe Point 4 or so years ago called How to Play Nice in the Sandbox of Marketing and IT. These groups of people do not at all get along. Ironically, marketing, IT, business users, the data folks, the executive team, they all have the same goal. They are all trying to help the business that they're part of win and be more effective and add more value to customers and shareholders and employees. They have the same mission. They just have 4 profoundly different philosophies on how to execute that vision, right? And if we think of the goal of an IT organization, their goal is to save the business money, decrease risk, right? The website cannot go down. The data that is being fed to our marketing initiatives should always be accurate and available. They're all about business continuity, quality of technology services, saving the business money, decreasing risk. On the flip side, if we look at the executive team, who I call the commercialized party, you're starting to see the 4 C's come out here. The executive team is very much focused on making money, growing the value of the business, right? In sometimes direct conflict of what IT wants to accomplish. They're willing to be maybe more early adopters. They're willing to be a little bit more risky, as long as they understand how a particular piece of work or investment will allow them to grow the business. It's their goal to make kind of educated bets on making money, growing the value of the business. Again, kind of the opposite of IT's job. If we go to the other 2 groups, those data people, who I call the control party, are about owning data. right? So anything that we do as an organization will throw off data. That data is our property. We should get our hands on it. We should bring it together. We should make it accurate. We should make it usable. We should make it easy to both report on and leverage for advanced programs like personalization or call center campaigns or what have you. But our data is ours. We should own it. We should control it. That's the internal data team, who operate in direct contrast to the business users or the marketers, who I call the connect party. Similarly to the executive team, they have mandates, they have delivery campaigns and schedules where certain things have to happen at certain times because the executive team told them to. And if they have to get the data from a third-party network cookie, if they need to leverage an ad tech vendor's data store, as they have timelines to hit. They're out to kind of execute a plan. They're willing to connect data from any available source to just make things happen, right? Both in terms of reporting and in terms of running campaigns. So if we kind of stop and look at these four groups, they all have the same goal. They have four profoundly different philosophies on how to achieve that goal. And nowhere in this grid is a group that makes everybody play nicely together in the sandbox, right? So we get the create party, the control party, the commercialize party, and the connect party, which is where this whole 4Cs routine comes to play. And very often, I mean, to go back to that previous quote, at least 4 out of 5 times, these four groups cannot get along well enough to help a data initiative get off the runway. 1 in 5 times an insight turns into value, right? This is a huge challenge. I think the nice thing we have going for us is that those four groups will often lead to data anarchy, right? Most organizations are in a state of data anarchy. They're not democratic at all. It's just kind of, I was going to say Mad Max, but maybe I'll go with Escape from New York. Doesn't matter. Anarchy, right? Why did I say that's a good thing? Because it's actually an imminently solvable problem, because if we go back to that previous slide, all four groups are trying to win on the same thing. They just have different approaches on how to get there, which is actually, I think, really valuable, right? I mean, let's think about the create or IT organization and the control or internal data organization. Their mandate inside the business is to play really good defense. And that's a really good thing, right? Especially when we live in a world with GDPR and CCPA and all of the other data privacy acts globally that are starting to come up. Your IT organization and your internal data team, it's their goal to add business value by removing risk from the business, thinking about continuity and not, commercialization. Really good defense in a data initiative is more important now than it's ever been, right? You can't just go expose credit cards to Google Analytics by mistake. Not that you ever should have, but now's a real bad time to do it. Good defense is critical in winning with data, right? However, good defense only equals you will never score. You score, you don't score 100% of the shots you don't take. I'm on my second coffee of the day. You get my point. You need good offense to win with a data initiative. And if we think of the business users executing proactively a strategy that is endorsed by the executive team, both of those groups are out to grow business. You can see the importance of a data initiative having well-considered defense and well-considered offense at the same time. This is normally one of the slides where I start getting a lot of emails from people going, Jim, that was a really great talk. That all made a whole lot of sense. How often do you see all four of these groups of people actually play together to get something to happen? And the honest answer is more than 1 in 5 times, right? But like the program that I'm talking through today, this kind of 4Cs framework about bringing people together, is very, very effective once you start being explicit about it and talking about it through the organization. I'll also say that if anybody's seen anything so far where they go, don't agree, what about these guys, et cetera, this is really a living kind of process here. Anyone that will come to a talk like this certainly has something to participate with. Fire in those questions, hit me on LinkedIn, send me an email. Your questions make me smarter. Let's think about how those 4 different political parties could work together, right? And to go back to the previous slide, I really view these 4 groups as the 4 political parties that equal a proper data democracy inside a business, right? So, in Canada, we've got, 3 legitimate political parties, in my opinion, but 5 or 6 on the ballot. Each of them have similar goals in terms of a Canada that is, effective and well run. They all have very, very different philosophies on how to get there. They all have to sit in the House of Commons together. This is something similar about your business, right? How do these 4 parties with 4 different philosophies, but one ultimate shared vision, come together to help people win with data, right? And it equals representative democracy or representative data democracy. And that's the ultimate root cause here, right? So for a data-driven initiative to really be successful, all 4 of those political parties have to work together in concert with that common goal at a macro level. The business must win, but with a specific goal for the data initiative and a clear owner, which again will be representative data democracy. And that's ultimately the solution here. It's not go buy this software. It's not hire Napkyn, although I strongly encourage you to. We're very smart. It's not create a title that doesn't exist. It's about, if you accept this framework and realize that everyone in the business can work together, then you should really start working together now, right? So step 1 of this solution, you got to go around the org. You have to get people to acknowledge and buy into this concept of a 4-party system. If the executive team goes, yes, that's awesome, but IT doesn't, it's not going to work, because IT has to do a tremendous amount of the heavy lifting on major data initiatives. Data must be created. All 4 of these groups need to at least buy into this concept once, right? Find a data initiative. What I've started to flesh out for you today in terms of planning for a cookieless world is a great example. There's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in businesses right now. Maybe that's the first thing you try, but everybody has to agree to play together once. When they do, I always do it on a per data initiative basis, but assuming it's this planning for the cookieless world, each one of those 4 groups, IT, data, business users, and the executive team, have to ideally have 1 person from their org who will be point on the initiative, and everyone has to agree that 1 department will be the elected representative in charge of the initiative. So again, going back to one of my first few slides, a cookieless world initiative should be owned by the C-suite. A member of the C-suite should ultimately be the executive sponsor of this program, but there should be a direct downline into the other 3 groups with 1 person who's in charge of the contribution of that group. So all 4 parties have someone elected. Ultimately, someone's in charge of the committee, and then they work together because they have to, right? So if the IT department doesn't sign into a cookieless world initiative, you're not going to end up with a good data layer. You're not going to have good data engineering or infrastructure or governance or availability or documentation or any of those important things, right? So if IT is going to participate in this 4-party approach to planning for the cookieless world, they get to be a source of requirements. It can't just be the C-suite going, business transformation, and I read a Gartner report, and we want to be able to do these things in 3 years. IT needs to be able to go, while I agree with that, we can't consider it successful unless it's been documented, QA'd, it is governable, whatever requirements they have to play kind of risk management and maximum uptime for the business. Same thing for the data team, right? They have to contribute time and effort and be a part of this initiative. Even though the executive team owns it, the data organization should be in a position where they go, cool, we can help. However, it needs to follow this schema that we use for other things. The data must be able to be made available to, AWS in the following ways, so we can hook it into these other things. Like, that is winning for us. When projects are managed like this sometimes, and everyone gets to have an opinion on what finished looks like, I understand that scope creep and complexity can be a real easy way to kill an initiative, right? I'm not saying that 100% of everyone's requirements make the finished specification for that first piece of work, but everyone's requirements have to be equally weighted and considered to bound what a good kind of version 1 initiative will be, or else it's not going to work. And I'll tell you right now, any department whose requirements are not considered is going to be less excited to push a bunch of capacity and budget and people at developing a piece of work. So initial solution, all 4 parties need to play, or else it's not going to work, right? 4 platforms from 4 parties equals, well, 1 aligned plan. It should be 4-4-1. My typo, right? The executive team needs to treat this cookieless world as a major opportunity. It's a priority corporate executive. They will proactively endorse and support this initiative. They won't just go, that's a good idea, and then take off to the next thing. This will be actively owned. They will ideally have a project manager to bring the whole initiative together, reporting directly into the executive team. And they will also be, a source of real executable requirements for kind of version 1 of this cookieless world program. The business users are also going to step up by doing a full review of all the tools they have in the ecosystem of ad tech and martech that require cookie data to work. Maybe they cross out a bunch of things that won't work anymore moving forward. Maybe they make a large list of, forgetting tools for a second, here are the business cases we would like to accomplish. We want to be able to target display advertising to specific groups of people. Maybe we can't retarget individuals, but we want to be able to retarget audiences. Maybe we want to be able to continue to personalize email, call center scripts, direct mail moving forward based on the data we bring together. And also thinking about the impact of data in terms of reporting and democratization, right? So we've looked at the tools, but we've also looked at the users of the tools, and we would like everyone to have a common level of training in terms of this type of reporting. We would like everyone in the organization to be able to contribute to planning by understanding data strategy this far, right? So how do we kind of upversion all of the users and our infrastructure as part of this initiative? And that's where a lot of their requirements are going to come from. The BI and data team is going to review all of the owned data in the business. They're going to think about digital data as an important piece of that pie moving forward, and they're going to make a list of requirements on how digital data should be captured, named, structured, made available, and integrated internally with the other data that exists. The IT organization is going to review the current state of infrastructure. Do we have a data layer? How are things deployed? How much kind of, as mentioned earlier, kind of hot fix level spaghetti JavaScript is in our tag manager? How do we move ourselves as an organization into a place where all of that cruft is gone? And we've got some rigor, some QA, and some documentation around data creation, data availability, and data governance, right? I just said the same initiative in 4 completely different ways. Those are 4 different sets of requirements, but when you mash up the defensive requirements with the offense requirements, you end up with something that's really quite exciting, right? And it will be much easier to execute than to have one team try and bullet through. And again, if you're on this call and you work in data, I would guess that most of the initiatives that you're involved in right now have one part of the organization sponsoring it, everybody else kind of either unaware or fighting against it. That's where we get that 1 in 5 from, right? So if you buy into, for starters, I guess this kind of approach to preparing for the cookieless world, but also the applicability of the 4 C's framework in terms of actioning data projects, then here's some next steps, here's some takeaways. So regardless of someone's role in the business, if they actually like being employed there, they all have the same goal ultimately, and that's to move the business forward. Different groups of people in the business, normally based on role, have very different philosophies. By the way, the easiest way to figure out what a group's philosophies are is to figure out how they get their bonuses For example, IT bonuses are often tied to uptime and quality of service. Executive bonuses are normally tied to growth of the business, growth of gross margin, things like that. And different groups have different philosophies, and ultimately democracy trumps anarchy. I don't want to turn this into a full poli-sci debate here, but I think we can agree that people working together in a business is going to do better than people working against each other, right? From those takeaways, here's some things to think about. An initiative that uses data is a data project. Whether you're buying a new email tool, whether you're planning for the cookieless world, whether you're redeploying Salesforce, an initiative that uses data is a data project, and this 4Cs framework is applicable to that, right? Other parts of the organization, especially other parts of your organization that will have to contribute to a project, therefore should be sources of requirements and not just capacity. That's really important. A, it makes the work better. B, it will ensure a higher take rate in terms of buy-in and support across the org. And when you talk to people, you're more likely to have them listen. You're more likely to have them contribute, right? Active communication across the org on data projects, it makes them go faster. It makes it easier to retrospect on them when you're finished, and it makes future projects much quicker, much more effective. So hopefully you've enjoyed the ramble, and you're in a position right now where you've taken one or two things and you thought, when I get back to the office, I'm going to try to do FMA. Maybe it's trying to erase the data as a 4-letter word around this new cookieless world that we're moving towards. Maybe it's fixing the data as a 4-letter word around the internal frustrations around winning with data. But I really hope that everyone today got one or two things that they've written down that they can kind of go and push with when they're back in the office. If you have any questions, you can hit me on Twitter. I check it once a year whether I need to or not. LinkedIn, much more effective, and obviously email on our website. Thank you all for the time, and looking forward to some great questions.